There's a certain kind of soul that's drawn to the freedom of the American wilderness. It's a life of quiet strength and self-reliance, a life lived by the rhythm of the seasons, not a clock. For over a decade on the History Channel's Mountain Men, Tom Oar was the very picture of that spirit. We watched a man who had seemingly mastered the wild, a modern-day frontiersman living a life most of us can only dream of, but behind the buckskin and the quiet wisdom, a much darker, more painful story was unfolding. This isn't just the story of a man who conquered the wilderness. It's the story of how the wilderness, time, and tragedy eventually conquered him. It's a story that starts not in the peaceful forests of Montana, but in the violent, dust-choked chaos of a rodeo arena, where one brutal moment would change his life forever. What really happened to the man who seemed invincible? The truth is a heartbreaking journey of resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship. Long before anyone knew Tom Oar for his quiet life in the Yaak Valley, he was a man defined by noise, speed, and incredible risk. Born in Illinois in 1943, Tom's spirit just wasn't made for the flatlands. He was born into a world of horses. His father was a true horseman, a performer in Wild West shows who passed down a love for all things thrilling and untamed. By the time Tom and his brother were just 7, they were already learning to trick ride, performing acrobatics on the back of a running horse. It was a childhood that gave him a taste for living on the edge and made him comfortable with the kind of danger that would define his youth. For a young man with that kind of fire, there was only one place to go: the rodeo. The dream took a powerful hold on him in his teenage years. At just 15, Tom Oar did something that tells you everything you need to know about his character. His mother drove him to the edge of town, he grabbed his bull rope and rigging bag, and he hitchhiked to Ohio to join a rodeo circuit. He wasn't running away from home, he was running towards a destiny he felt he had to claim. Throughout the 1960s, Tom became a force to be reckoned with in the International Rodeo Association. He specialized in 2 of the most dangerous events, saddle bronc and bull riding. He wasn't just some participant, he was a champion rider, consistently ranking in the top 10. He thrived on the adrenaline, the raw contest between man and beast. The rodeo was more than a sport, it was his identity. It was a world of incredible highs, the roar of the crowd, the respect of his peers, and the satisfaction of taming an uncontrollable force. But the rodeo is a cruel master. Every 8-second ride is a gamble, and the odds are never really in your favor. Injuries aren't a risk, they're a certainty. And for all his skill, Tom was no exception. Then came Valentine's Day, 1970. It was a day that would be burned into his memory forever. He was perched on a massive bull named Woolly Bugger, a name that would mark the end of his first life. In bull riding, Tom had a habit of dropping a finger into his bull rope, a technique that locked his hand to the animal, giving him more control but also making it impossible to let go in an emergency. When the chute opened, all hell broke loose. The bull bucked so violently that Tom's skull smashed against the animal's, knocking him out instantly. But his hand was still locked in the rope. For 2 agonizing minutes, which must have felt like an eternity to his wife Nancy watching from the stands, Tom's limp body was thrashed around the arena. He was pinned to the bucking, spinning, 1,000-pound beast, his legs getting caught underneath, trampled again and again. When they finally cut the rope, Tom was carried out on a stretcher. He was unconscious for 3 long hours. The diagnosis was grim, a severe concussion and extensive bruising over most of his body. It was the closest he had ever come to death in the arena. In a strange, almost mythical twist, Tom later learned that the bull, Woolly Bugger, died 2 weeks after the incident. Tom, with that classic cowboy twinkle in his eye, would joke, "I think I gave him a concussion, too." Though he showed incredible grit by getting back in the chutes just a month later, something was broken. He never found his old success. The thrill was gone, replaced by the stark reality of his own mortality. The cheers of the crowd started to fade, and the arena, which once felt like his whole world, now felt like a cage. In 1981, Tom Oar officially retired from the rodeo. But this wasn't an end. It was a violent, painful, and absolutely necessary new beginning. He had to find a new way to live, a new wilderness to conquer. This time, it wouldn't be for just 8 seconds. It would be for the rest of his life. Leaving the rodeo wasn't just a career change for Tom and Nancy Oar, it was a complete reinvention of their lives. They turned their backs on the familiar world of highways and arenas and headed for a life of deliberate, challenging solitude. Their destination was the Yaak River Valley in the far northwestern corner of Montana, one of the most remote places in the lower 48 states. They'd visited the area before during Tom's rodeo days, staying with friends in the nearby town of Troy, and had fallen in love with its rugged beauty. This wasn't some move made with a comfortable savings account or a detailed plan. It was a leap of faith, driven by a desire for a different kind of freedom. They loaded their belongings into an old pickup truck, a vehicle bought with money Tom had earned trapping muskrat pelts, a little hint of the life that was waiting for them. Tom himself admitted, "We had no idea what we were getting into or how I was gonna make a living out here. But I just had a feeling that, by God, I can do it. I can get it done." Their new life started on a small plot of land with a tiny, 2-room log cabin. This was their home base while they took on the huge task of building their own home from the ground up. Before they even left Illinois, they bought a chainsaw, the main tool they would use to build their new life. For 5 years, they lived in that small cabin, patiently and painstakingly building the larger log home that would become their sanctuary, the one mountain men audiences would come to know so well. They cut every log themselves and split every shake for the roof. Those early years were tough. This wasn't a romantic getaway, it was a constant, grinding fight for survival. When they first moved to the Yaak, there were practically no jobs. But as Tom noted, there were all kinds of deer. Survival meant living off the land in every sense of the word. They hunted, fished, and trapped, learning the rhythms of the forest, the patterns of the animals, and the unforgiving nature of the seasons. Winters in the Yaak are brutal, often lasting up to 7 months, with deep snow and bone-chilling cold. Tom had to learn a new set of skills, or maybe, rediscover ancient ones. He loved history and often said he felt like he was born 150 or 200 years too late. Living in the Yaak was his way of living that passed in a modern world. He learned to tan hides before he even moved to Montana, a skill that grew from a childhood interest in making moccasins. He later perfected the art of brain tanning, a traditional Native American method where an animal's own brain is used to treat its hide. This became the foundation of his new livelihood. He would trap beaver in the Rocky Mountains, hunt deer, and then turn the hides into beautiful, hand-sewn buckskin clothing, moccasins, and jackets. For years, this is how they got by. They would work tirelessly all year making their crafts, then travel to 1 or 2 rendezvous events a year, trade fairs for mountain men and artisans, where they hoped to make a few $1,000s to see them through. Their income was small. Tom said they never made more than $20,000 in a year. But it was enough. It was a life built not on money, but on resilience, partnership, and a deep connection to the natural world. For over 3 decades, Tom and Nancy lived this life, far from the comforts of the modern world. Their cabin had no internet or cell phone service. Their contact with the outside world was limited, and that was on purpose. They had chosen a life of quiet dignity, where success was measured by a full pantry, a warm fire, and the satisfaction of knowing they had provided for themselves with their own 2 hands. It was this authentic, hard-won life that would eventually, and unexpectedly, bring the outside world, and a TV crew, to their remote doorstep. For more than 30 years, Tom Oar's life was a private story of self-reliance. He was a local legend in the Yaak, known for his craft and his friendly, easygoing nature, but his world was intentionally small. Then, in 2012, everything changed. The History Channel launched Mountain Men, a reality series about people living off the grid in America's toughest environments. Tom Oar, with his bushy white beard, a constant twinkle in his eye, and a lifetime of real wilderness experience, was a perfect fit. Suddenly, a man who had chosen solitude was in the national spotlight. A film crew of about 5 people began visiting his remote home for about a week each month, for 6 months out of the year, documenting his every move. For Tom, it was a strange new reality. He insisted on just doing what he always did, whether it was tanning hides, building bows, or setting his traplines. But now, these everyday tasks were being broadcast to millions. The show often put the crew through its paces. Tom remembered a deer hunt that lasted for 3 days, with cameramen hauling 25-pound cameras through rough country just to keep up. Hunting with such a large, noisy group was a challenge, but Tom eventually got his deer, and the crew captured it for the world to see. On screen, Tom became the heart and soul of the show for many viewers. He wasn't a loud, dramatic reality TV character, he was the real deal. His appeal came from his quiet authenticity and the deep, unspoken partnership he shared with his wife, Nancy. Viewers were captivated by their dynamic. They saw Nancy right there with Tom, a constant and capable partner in their wilderness life. They watched Tom's incredible skills, from the detailed process of brain tanning a hide to his deep knowledge of trapping and hunting. He became a symbol of a fading way of life, a living link to the mountain men of the 1800s he admired so much. Fame brought changes, both good and bad. The demand for his handcrafted buckskin goods went through the roof. Tom, who hand-sewed every single item, admitted he could never keep up with the business the show brought in. The steady paycheck from the History Channel also eased their financial worries, giving them a level of security they had never had before. For a man who had never earned much, reports suggest he eventually made around $15,000 per episode, building a surprising net worth of over $200,000. But fame had its price. The quiet life they had built was now a tourist attraction. Curious fans started making the long trip to their property, hoping to catch a glimpse of the real-life mountain man. While Tom was usually good-natured about it, shrugging and saying he'd rather people like him than hate him, the constant stream of visitors went against the very reason they'd moved to the Yacht in the first place, for peace and quiet. Despite the cameras and the new celebrity status, Tom stayed the same. He was still the man who found deep satisfaction in working with his hands, who preferred the company of his dog, Ellie, and his wife, Nancy, to any crowd. He was a craftsman, a mentor, and to many, a hero. He represented a powerful idea, that it was still possible to live a life of integrity and freedom, on your own terms. But as the seasons passed and Tom entered his late 70s, a new and powerful enemy began to surface, one that no amount of skill or grit could beat. Time itself was catching up, and the body that had endured so much was about to send him a terrifying warning. For a man like Tom Oar, whose entire life was built on physical strength, the idea of his own body failing him was something he never really considered. He'd always been healthy, strong, and able to bounce back from the brutal injuries of his rodeo days to handle the tough demands of life in the wilderness. As he neared 80, he was still out there, as he put it, working like I am, knowing it was a challenge but simply what he did. But the human body has limits, and in the 11th season of Mountain Men, viewers saw the terrifying moment Tom's body finally hit its breaking point. The crisis came without warning, in the middle of the night. Tom woke up suddenly, gasping for air. For his wife Nancy, this was a huge red flag. Tom just wasn't a man who complained or admitted he was vulnerable. When he agreed they needed to get help, she knew it was serious. Their situation immediately highlighted the danger of their isolated life. The nearest health clinic was in Libby, Montana, a treacherous 80-mile drive from their cabin. That journey, through remote and rugged country, must have been filled with fear. They were a world away from a 911 call, and every mile was a reminder of just how alone they were. At the clinic, a series of tests delivered a devastating diagnosis. The doctors found that Tom's heart was failing, it wasn't pumping properly. Because of this, fluid was dangerously building up in his lungs, which is why he couldn't breathe. It was a life-threatening condition for anyone, but for a man living so far from medical care, it was a catastrophe. The myth of Tom Oar's invincibility was shattered in that sterile clinic room. The doctors immediately put him on medication to strengthen his heart. They fitted him with a heart rate monitor to keep track of his condition remotely. And in a stark, sobering move, they told him to wear a defibrillator vest. This device, worn under his clothes, would constantly monitor his heart and deliver a powerful electric shock if it detected a deadly rhythm, potentially saving his life if he had a sudden cardiac arrest. For Tom, this was more than just a medical diagnosis, it was a challenge to his very identity. As Nancy admitted, this heart thing, this is a whole new look on life for him. The man who had faced down blizzards and bears was now fighting an enemy inside himself, an invisible threat that couldn't be trapped or outsmarted. Their entire life had to change. The physical work, which they had always shared, now fell more on Nancy's shoulders. She had to take on more of the heavy chores, managing their homestead while Tom was forced to get used to his new, fragile reality. The diagnosis was a turning point, a brutal confrontation with his own mortality. The question was no longer about surviving the next winter, but whether they could survive in the wilderness at all. Tom, always defiant, refused to give up his way of life completely. Viewers saw him back on the trapline with his heart monitor blinking under his shirt, a testament to his incredible spirit. But the reality was undeniable. The life that had given him so much freedom was now becoming a death trap. The mountains that had been his sanctuary had become a place of immense risk. A heartbreaking choice was on the horizon, one that would pit his love for the wilderness against his will to live. The heart failure diagnosis was a verdict on a way of life. For Tom and Nancy Oar, that 80-mile trip to the clinic wasn't just for treatment, it was a journey toward a truth they couldn't ignore. Their beloved home in the Yaak Valley, a symbol of their grit and independence, had become a danger. The very isolation that once meant freedom now represented a mortal threat. For years, the idea of leaving had been in the back of their minds. As far back as 2013, and even during a tough winter shown in the show's second season, Tom had thought about retiring to a warmer, more forgiving place. He and Nancy had even considered moving to Florida to be closer to their son, Chad. Chad, who grew up in the wilderness but chose a different life, had long worried about his aging parents living so far from civilization. The long distance to the nearest town, the dangerous animals, and the simple fact they were hours from help weighed on him, but Tom always resisted. The idea of a quiet retirement, of sitting on a porch reading a newspaper, just didn't sit right with him. He once joked to an interviewer, "I keep telling Nancy, one of these days you'll probably just find me stretched out dead over the fleshing block." His entire identity was tied to the mountains, to the work, and to the struggle. His health crisis, however, changed everything. It was no longer about what he wanted, but what was necessary to survive. The defibrillator vest was a constant, humming reminder of how vulnerable he was. Doctors told him to avoid strenuous tasks, the very things that made up his daily life. Cutting wood, hauling gear, even riding a snowmobile now carried the risk of a fatal heart attack. Nancy, his ever-stoic partner, took on more and more of the physical labor, her love for Tom showing in every log she carried. The decision to leave wasn't made in a day. It was a slow, painful surrender. They began spending more time in Florida, splitting their year between two completely different worlds. For a while, they tried to make this work, returning to the Yaak when they could, clinging to the life they had built. This is why his screen time on Mountain Men became less frequent, as he was no longer a permanent resident of the wilderness he represented, but eventually, the back and forth was just too much. The physical toll and the constant medical risks became too great. Tom and Nancy made the gut-wrenching decision to relocate more permanently to Florida. Leaving their hand-built log cabin, the home that held 40 years of memories, was a profound tragedy. It was an admission that a chapter of their lives, the most important chapter, was over. This wasn't a failure, but an act of deep love and practicality. It was a choice to prioritize time with each other and their family over a place, even a place that was part of their souls. The mountain man was leaving the mountains, not because his spirit was broken, but because his body could no longer keep up. Tom Oar's story is a powerful reminder of the hidden struggles behind even the strongest people. It's a journey of resilience that is still going on. If you're moved by stories of survival and the human spirit, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. What moment from Tom Oar's time on Mountain Men has stuck with you the most? Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to light. Now, let's explore the final, and strangest, chapter of Tom's public life. For a man who lived his life so far from the digital world, it's strange and cruel how Tom Oar's later years became defined by it. As he started appearing less on Mountain Men, an information vacuum was created. Fans who felt a deep, personal connection to him and the life he stood for were left to wonder and worry. What happened to their quiet wilderness hero? This void was quickly filled by the darkest parts of the internet. Social media and clickbait blogs began to spread baseless and ghoulish rumors. The most persistent and upsetting of these were the fake obituaries. Multiple reports claimed that Tom Oar had passed away, causing huge distress and confusion among his loyal fans. The silence from official sources, Tom, his family, or the show's producers, only added fuel to the fire. People who had watched him for years felt a sense of ownership over his story, and without any facts, they filled in the blanks themselves. Some guessed he had simply retired to a quiet life, while others were convinced the tragic news was true. The situation became a bizarre cycle of rumor and correction, where credible sources would confirm he was alive, only for another death hoax to pop up months later. This whole mess highlights a strange and unsettling side of modern reality TV fame. Tom Oar, a man who chose a life of tangible, earthy realities, the feel of wood, the bite of the cold, the weight of a hide, was now battling a ghost in the machine. His very existence was being debated and declared over by strangers online, a stark and ironic twist for such a private man. His health scare in season 11, which was shown on the show, added a layer of what seemed like credibility to the rumors. Fans knew he was battling serious heart issues, which made the false report seem plausible. His reduced screen time and his move to Florida were twisted into more evidence that he was either gone or close to it. The truth, of course, is much more complicated. As of the latest reports, Tom Oar is still alive. He didn't just disappear. He made a necessary, life-altering choice to protect his health and be with his family. He returned for the 12th and 13th seasons of Mountain Men, and continues to make appearances, showing his resilience even in his 80s. He lives a quieter life now, splitting his time between the mountains he still loves and the gentler climate of Florida, a compromise forced on him by age and illness. The saga of his rumored death is a sad final note to his public life. It shows how easily misinformation can cause real emotional pain and how the public's hunger for a story, even a tragic one, can overshadow the quiet, complex truth of a person's life. Tom Oar tried to escape the noise of the modern world, only to have it echo back at him in the most bizarre and morbid way. On the surface, Tom Oar's story is a tragedy. It's the story of a dream career cut short by a violent accident, a body broken by the very life that made it strong, and a beloved home left behind out of necessity. It is a sad story, filled with pain, hardship, and heartbreaking choices. But if you only see the tragedy, you miss the profound and inspiring truth of his journey. Tom Oar's life isn't ultimately defined by what he lost, but by what he built, what he endured, and what he represents. He is the definition of resilience. When his rodeo career ended in disaster, he didn't give up. Instead, he and Nancy built a new life from scratch in one of the toughest environments you can imagine, armed with little more than a chainsaw and an unbreakable will. For over 40 years, they didn't just survive in the wilderness, they thrived, creating a life of meaning and dignity on their own terms. When fame found him by accident, he met it not with greed, but with a quiet grace, staying true to himself even as his life became public. And when his health finally turned against him, he faced it with the same practical courage he'd shown his whole life. The decision to leave the Yaak Valley for Florida wasn't a defeat, it was his final, greatest act of survival, a choice made for his family and for the time he had left. Today, Tom Oar is still living, still adapting, and still refusing to quit. He may have slowed down, and his days may be split between two different worlds, but the spirit of the mountain man is still there. His legacy is in every log of the cabin he built by hand, every hide he tanned with ancient skill, and every viewer he inspired with his quiet truth. He reminds us that a life of value isn't measured in comfort or money, but in strength, in love, and in the courage to face down the wilderness, both outside and within. The tragedy of Tom Oar isn't that he had to leave the mountains, it's that a man of such profound strength had to endure so much pain. Yet, through it all, his story remains a powerful, enduring testament to the resilience of the human heart.